Walk the World's Rim. We're going to finish this up today and starting at chapter 12, Chibola. Esteban was like a warrior at his first victory dance. He tied the bells more securely around his legs, arranged feathers in his hair, and flicked dust from those decorating his rattle. And now the lord of the Viceroy's stable is prepared to meet the headman of Chibola, he announced. There was no need to send a messenger ahead. The men of the pueblo had discovered their presence and were waiting at the foot of the mesa. Truly they were strange people. Their hair was cut off at the level of their chins. Necklaces of the blue stones lay heavy on their chests. Chaco might have laughed at their short skirts if they hadn't handled their bows and spears in the manner of men expert in their use. Esteban signaled his followers to wait and stepped forward with only Aunt Maria's husband, who knew enough of the language to interpret. Esteban spoke long and earnestly. From his gestures, Chaco knew he was telling of Fray Marcos and the Spaniards to the south. Then he held out the gourd rattle. With a slap of the hand, the headman of Chibola knocked it to the ground. Aunt Maria's husband retrieved it and handed it to Esteban. There was more talk, this time from the Chibolian. Esteban replied. The headman gestured. The Chibolians swarmed over Esteban. They carried him up the mesa trail, up the ladder, and over the wall. When the last Chibolian was inside the city, the ladder followed. It happened so quickly that Aunt Maria's husband was still standing bewildered, his hands outstretched, when Chaco rushed up. What are they doing with Esteban? They are holding him prisoner. I can see that, snapped Chaco. But what will they do with him? They will hold council to decide. We will rescue him. By now the Pima were crowding around them. They shook their heads at the suggestion of a rescue. It was impossible. Once the ladders were pulled up, no one could get into the pueblo. With arrows and rocks, the Chibolians could fight off any war party. Chibola stared up. Chaco stared up at the tiers of walls, one atop the other like a man-made cliff. Somewhere in that city, Esteban was a prisoner, and there was nothing Chaco could do but wait. He paced back and forth along the mesa. Why? He asked. What did Esteban say to make them angry? He said he came from the white man to the south, replied Maria's husband. There is nothing wrong with that. No, but it is strange that white men should send a black man as messenger. Then they began to understand that the white men were the same hair-faced faces their traders met. Chaco nodded. Your wife told me they had passed through your village and spoken angrily of the slave raiders. They believe the hair faces will come and try to make them slaves. Esteban told them they would not. He told them the gray robe is a man of peace, a good man. I assured them that neither the gray robe nor the dark one would harm them. That is true. But it does not matter. They believe the hair faces are coming only for slaves. They say they should kill the black one and any others that are sent as a warning. Then the hair faces will stay in their own country. Chaco stared up at the wall. Aunt Maria's husband patted his arm. Do not worry. They will not kill him until the council is over, and they may decide to set him free. They are strange people. One can never tell what they will do. All day and all night, Esteban lay in the small windowless room of the pueblo without food or water. At the foot of the mesa, his friends waited. In the hours before dawn, Chaco opened his medicine bag and carefully drew the circle of life. Then he closed his eyes and repeated the prayers the priests in Mexico had taught him. When the first rays of the sun lit the walls of the pueblo, a ladder was pushed over. One by one, the Chibolians came down to the mesa. Then a tall, dark figure appeared on the wall. "They are releasing Esteban," cried Chaco. He hurried forward to greet his friend. Esteban climbed down the ladder, and walked to the foot of the mesa. As he passed through the ring of Chibolians, one of them pushed him and shouted. Esteban began to run. Bows lifted, arrows whined. Esteban stumbled, recovered, and staggered on. Then, like a tree trunk by lightning, a great body swayed, toppled, and thudded to the ground. "Esteban!" Heedless of the arrows, Chaco raced toward his friend. "Esteban!" He knelt and rolled the heavy body on its back. Desperately, he rubbed one hand between his own, calling Esteban over and over. But the hands, so large but so gentle, would never again fashion boats or scarecrows. The dark face tilted back toward the sky. No laughter poured forth. The eyes mirrored nothing, no joy, no mischief, not even sorrow. Esteban would walk the rim of the world no longer. Near his outstretched hand lay the gourd rattle, gift of the buffalo people, for the joy he had given. Chaco reached out and picked it up. He knelt there, staring down at the gourd trimmed with red and white feathers. Rocking back and forth in his grief, he cried aloud, "Why didn't you go with them? Why didn't you leave us and go when you could?" But even as he spoke, he knew Esteban could not have broken his word, not even if he had known what waited at the end of the trail. Then Chaco was thrown to the ground. He pushed himself to hands and knees and rose unsteadily to his feet. Before him stretched his shadow, a shadow arrow in its side. His hot moisture ran down his thigh. His fingers traced it curiously to his side and felt the shaft. As yet there was no pain, just a numb acceptance that something unusual had happened to him. Aunt Maria's husband grabbed his arm. "Run! Look, I have an arrow in my side. There is no time. Run!" Chaco let himself be dragged away. Dimly he remembered to tuck the rattle into the thong of his loincloth. Of the more than 100 Pima who had accompanied Esteban, only a handful remained. They met Fray Marcos 2 days' journey down the trail and reported the tragedy at Chibola. There was little Chaco could remember of the flight from Chibola. Weariness, hunger, the pain from the wound in his side, and the blur of voices and hands. Fray Marcos's strong, bony hands urging him forward. Aunt Maria's gentle ones tending him, and her voice husky with worry and urging him to stay. Then his own voice, strange in his ears, insisting on running to Mexico with Fray Marcos. He must have had his way, for in the red blur of pain, he remembered the litter that carried him to Culiacán, the unbearable jostling of horses, then mercifully nothing until he roused to the dull thud of horse hooves on the causeways. Then came the whispers, many whispers. In the background, the clicking of prayer beads. Then they were too lost in the hot waves of pain and fever. Chapter 13, Go with God. The sun had taken the night chill from the plaza. From his seat at the convent window, Chaco watched the robed priests, the Indians in short white mantles, and the overdressed Spaniards that thronged the marketplace. Horses pushed slowly through the crowd. One shied at the banner carried by a court page. All Mexico had gathered for the fiesta, and not one among them could Chaco call friend. Brother Solano bustled into the room. "I'm sorry to be late, but there's a great to-do in the kitchen today." He gathered the plates of untouched food from the table, scolding Chaco gently. "You live by the grace of God, but the Lord cannot help you if you do not eat." "I am not hungry." "You cannot watch a fiesta on an empty stomach." "I'll leave the apricots and yam cakes." Chaco smiled. During the day, Brother Solano would send more baskets and platters from the kitchen, tempting his appetite with everything the garden or market provided. By sundown, he would be surrounded by food for which he had no taste. How strange was life! Hunger had brought him to Mexico. Now he had food and could not eat. There were whispers outside the room. Fray Marcos walked briskly across the floor and felt Chaco's head. "The wound is healing. The fever has gone, but you must eat, my son. You cannot live on an empty stomach." "Or with an empty heart?" "I know how you feel. I lost many friends when I was with Pizarro in Peru, but the sadness passes." To be sure, the familiar words tightened in his throat, and the emptiness inside him grew. He was alone and far from home. Who will mourn him? "I will pray for his soul." But the priest's tone showed he considered it a duty. It was not grief that prompted the prayers for a disobedient slave. Dorantes would certainly grieve, but only for a valuable possession that he had lost. Only Cabeza de Vaca might bow his head a moment when he heard. Esteban was so far from his own land and his own people. There was no one to light the funeral pyre and chant the death song. "And if I had died from my wound," thought Chaco, "who would have lit mine?" He straightened in the chair and reached for a yam cake. Fray Marcos nodded approvingly and began to tell the great army Coronado was to lead against Chibola. Already men were flocking to sign under his banner, but Chaco heard other words, another voice. "Can you bear arms in the service of the king, or do you have a trade to serve those who do bear arms? What will you do in Mexico, little one?" As if in answer to his despair, he remembered, "My hut will be empty until you return." Aunt Maria had said it, but it was not her hut that Chaco saw. He rose abruptly and began piling his few possessions on the large bed: the medicine bag, Esteban's rattle, the bow that had gathered dust since he first came to Mexico. "My son," exclaimed Fray Marcos, "what are you doing?" "I am going home." He glared at the priest, defying him to stop his return. Fray Marcos pulled thoughtfully at his lower lip. "Yes, that is best for you, but not now. You are too weak for such a long journey." "I am strong enough to travel as far as Aunt Maria's. I shall rest there and learn the planting songs and the way of growing things. Then I shall trade for seeds to take with me to my people." There would never be any question of what he could do among his own people. He would be a warrior, a hunter, and in time, a headman in his village. His heart would be full, and with the earth magic of the Pima, his people could fill their stomachs. Fray Marcos rose and placed his hands on Chaco's shoulders. "Do not forget your prayers. Teach them to your people. Someday we shall come to you. Perhaps not in your time or even in your son's, but we shall come and build a church. You will be welcome. I shall ask Brother Solano to prepare food for your journey. We will also give you seeds from our garden." The priest drew his rosary from his belt. "Take this with you. Remember, it was prayer that saved your life. Go with God, my son." He made the sign of the cross and hurried from the room. Chaco slipped the prayer beads into the medicine bag. with the last few tea leaves, the deer hoof rattle, and the 2 blue stones he planned to trade for the Pima for seeds. Sorry. The need is great, he whispered. He had more difficulty with his farewells in the kitchen. Brother Solano tried to persuade him to stay. His last argument was of dangers. One boy alone, with all those heathens? You will be killed, lad. It was hard enough for the 4 men when you came. How can you travel it alone? I go with God, answered Chaco, and I must return. Esteban had shown him that. He had wanted freedom more than anything the Spaniards could have given. He would be among the buffalo people now if he had not kept his word and finished his mission. Chaco could do no less. When Brother Solano saw his pleas had no effect, he tried to load Chaco with more food than the boy could possibly carry. When at last he walked into the plaza, the last of the crowd was shuffling into the arena of the bullfights. Esteban had often tried to describe the fights, but Chaco could never imagine them as anything other than man chased by buffalo. He stood in the empty plaza, remembering the first time he had seen Esteban do pantomime. Trumpets blared in the arena. The crowd cheered. Chaco could almost see Esteban entering the plaza, mincing and bowing with the buffalo robe over his shoulder. More trumpets, more cheers. Esteban cavorted now as the buffalo, now as the hunter. Chaco saw him clearly in the center of the plaza, swinging the robe, thrusting with the stone knife, and then, as the buffalo, sprawling on the stones and kicking his legs. But this time the buffalo did not rise, but sat up, dusted the paving, and lay down as if to sleep. Ole, ole, rose from the arena. The vision faded with the cheers. There was nothing in the plaza but the litter of the fiesta. Chaco dropped his bundles and bow and ran back to the Abbey kitchen. Brother Solano looked up in surprise but said nothing when Chaco gathered fuel and an ember from the fire. He carried them to the center of the deserted plaza, to the spot where Esteban, as the buffalo, had lain down to die. The fire was small but large enough for the purpose. When it burned brightly, Chaco unfastened the gourd rattle from his waistband and laid it gently atop the flames. The feathers blazed and were gone. The gourd crackled and spit as it burned. Chaco watched until there was nothing left of the precious rattle, nothing left to bind Esteban's spirit to his foreign land. Then Chaco raised both arms above his head, faced the land of the rising sun, and began to chant. He sang of a spirit wandering far from his home. He begged forgiveness for having no more possessions to add to the fire, but the Dark One had been poor in life. He had walked the world with nothing but a great heart, and that he had shared with many. The chant ended with a plea to release Esteban's spirit from this strange land. Let it find rest in the land of his fathers. Through the wispy smoke, he thought he saw Esteban leaping and cavorting as the buffalo chased the hunter. He blinked and the vision was gone. Farewell, my friend. Go with God. Then he shouldered his bow, picked up his bundles, and spat twice over his shoulder. The medicine bag swung full and heavy against his thigh as he strode out over the causeway. He did not look back. The end.